The rain had come without warning, one of those sudden, stubborn downpours that turned the city gray and restless within minutes. It began as a soft whisper against the pavement, a quiet tapping that most people ignored, but within moments it grew into a relentless curtain, blurring lights, swallowing sounds, and forcing the world into a hurried retreat. People rushed for cover, umbrellas bloomed like dark flowers, and the streets became a chaotic symphony of splashing tires and impatient horns. Arman stood beneath the narrow shelter of a bus stop that did little to protect him from the sideways rain. Water dripped steadily from the edge of the rusted metal roof, finding its way onto his shoulders, soaking through the thin fabric of his shirt. He rolled up his sleeves anyway, more out of habit than usefulness, and checked his phone for what felt like the 10th time in 2 minutes. Late. The word sat heavy in his mind, pressing down on him with a familiar weight. He had already been warned twice this month. Another late arrival, and there would be consequences he couldn't afford, deductions, maybe even termination. In a city where jobs were scarce and competition endless, losing this one wasn't just an inconvenience. It was a threat to everything: rent, food, the fragile sense of stability he had managed to build. He exhaled slowly, running a hand through his damp hair, pushing it back as the rain intensified. Across the road, traffic crawled, headlights cutting through the gray haze like tired eyes. People darted between vehicles, shoes splashing through shallow puddles, coats pulled tightly around their bodies. He considered making a run for it. It would take him 10 minutes, maybe less if he pushed himself. He could arrive drenched, breathless, but at least he would be there. Maybe his supervisor would notice the effort. Maybe it would count for something. But his feet didn't move. Something had caught his attention. At first, it was just a shape, a still figure in the shifting blur of rain. Then, as he narrowed his eyes, he saw her clearly. A woman sat near the curb on the opposite side of the street, her wheelchair angled awkwardly toward the road. Rain poured over her without mercy, soaking her clothes, flattening her hair against her face. One of the front wheels of her chair was twisted at an unnatural angle, wedged into a crack near the drainage grate. She was trying to move. Her hands gripped the wheels, pushing, pulling, adjusting, but the chair refused to cooperate. Each attempt seemed to frustrate her more, though she remained silent, her expression focused rather than desperate. People passed her. A man in a suit hurried by, shielding his head with a leather briefcase. A woman with a bright red umbrella slowed for a second, glanced at the stuck wheel, then continued walking. Two teenagers laughed as they ran past, splashing water carelessly, not even noticing her. Arman felt something tighten in his chest. He looked down at his phone again. The time hadn't changed enough to matter, but it felt like it had, like every second was slipping away faster than it should. If he left now, he could still make it. If he stayed, he would definitely be late. He clenched his jaw. "Not your problem," he muttered under his breath, though the words didn't sit right. He had learned that phrase over time, built it into his thinking as a way to survive. In a city that demanded constant motion, stopping for others often meant falling behind yourself. But still, he didn't move. His eyes drifted back to the woman. She tried again, pushing harder this time. The wheel shifted slightly, then snapped back into place with a stubborn resistance that made her shoulders slump for just a fraction of a second. It was a small gesture, barely noticeable, but it was enough. Arman exhaled sharply. "Damn it," he whispered. Before he could overthink it, he stepped out from under the shelter. The rain hit him instantly, cold and unrelenting, soaking him within seconds. He jogged across the street, weaving between slow-moving cars, ignoring the annoyed honk of a driver forced to brake for him. By the time he reached her, he was already drenched. "Hey," he said, slightly out of breath. "Looks like it's stuck." She looked up at him. For a moment, there was no response, just a quiet, assessing gaze. Her eyes were sharp, observant, taking him in with a kind of calm that felt out of place in the chaos around them. There was no panic in her expression, no plea for help. Just awareness. "I noticed," she replied, her voice steady despite the rain. Arman gave a small, awkward nod, scratching the back of his neck. "Yeah, I mean, of course you did. I just, can I take a look?" She studied him for another second, as if weighing something unseen, then nodded slightly. "Go ahead." He crouched down beside the wheelchair, ignoring the water soaking through his pants as his knee touched the ground. Up close, he could see the problem clearly. The small front wheel had slipped into a narrow gap in the pavement, twisted at an angle that prevented it from rotating properly. "Hold on," he said, reaching carefully for the wheel. "I think I can fix this." He adjusted his grip, trying to avoid putting too much pressure on the fragile-looking mechanism. The metal was slick from the rain, making it harder to get a firm hold. "On 3, he murmured. "I'll lift it a bit and straighten it." She nodded again, her hands steady on the larger wheels. 1, 2, 3. He pulled upward, applying just enough force to lift the stuck wheel while nudging it back into alignment. For a second, nothing happened. Then, with a soft, satisfying click, the wheel slipped free. "There we go," he said, a hint of relief in his voice. He stood up, wiping his wet hands on his already soaked shirt. "Try it now." She pushed the wheels gently. The chair moved forward smoothly, no resistance, no hesitation. A faint smile touched her lips. "Thank you," she said. Arman shrugged, suddenly feeling self-conscious. It was nothing. Just bad luck with the road. She tilted her head slightly, watching him. Most people didn't think it was worth stopping for. He glanced at the street behind him, where people were still hurrying past, eyes forward, minds elsewhere. "Yeah, well, most people are in a hurry. And you're not?" she asked. He let out a quiet laugh, shaking his head. "Oh, I definitely am. I'm actually late for work right now." She raised an eyebrow. "And yet you stopped." He hesitated, not entirely sure how to answer that. The truth was, he didn't know why he had stopped, not in any logical sense. It hadn't been a calculated decision. It had just happened. "I guess," he said slowly, "some things matter more than being on time." The words surprised him as much as they seemed to interest her. For a brief moment, the rain felt less overwhelming, the noise of the city fading into the background as they stood there, facing each other in the middle of it all. Then reality snapped back. Arman glanced at his phone again, his eyes widening. "Oh no, what is it?" she asked. "I'm really late now," he said, running a hand over his face. "Like, really late." She smiled faintly. "Then you should go." "Yeah," he said quickly. "Yeah, I should." He took a step back, then paused. "Are you going to be okay?" "I will," she replied. "Thanks to you." He nodded, offering a small, almost embarrassed smile. "All right then. Take care." "You too, Arman." He froze. "How did you?" But she was already turning her wheelchair, moving toward the sidewalk with a smooth, confident motion. The rain continued to fall around them, but she didn't seem bothered by it anymore. Arman stood there for a second longer, confusion flickering across his face. He was sure he hadn't told her his name. "Maybe I did," he muttered to himself, though he couldn't remember when. Shaking his head, he turned and started running. The streets blurred as he pushed forward, shoes splashing through puddles, breath coming in short bursts. By the time he reached the warehouse, he was completely soaked, his clothes clinging to him uncomfortably. He slowed to a stop at the entrance, trying to catch his breath before stepping inside. The building loomed above him, familiar and unwelcoming. Inside, he knew exactly what awaited him: disapproving looks, sharp words, maybe even a written warning. He braced himself and walked in. The fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, casting a harsh glow over the rows of shelves and stacked boxes. A few coworkers glanced at him, some smirking, others shaking their heads. "Nice of you to join us," one of them muttered. Arman ignored the comment, heading straight for his station. He could already feel the tension building, the inevitable confrontation just moments away. "Arman." The voice cut through the noise, firm and unmistakable. He turned slowly. His supervisor stood a few feet away, arms crossed, expression unreadable. "You're late," the man said. Arman swallowed. "I know. I'm sorry." "I don't need excuses," the supervisor interrupted. "This isn't the first time." "I understand," Arman said quickly. "It won't happen again." The supervisor studied him for a moment, then sighed. "Get to work. We'll talk about this later." Arman nodded, relief mixing with lingering anxiety. "Yes, sir." As he turned back to his station, he couldn't shake the image of the woman in the rain, The calm in her eyes, the way she had said his name, the faint smile that had lingered even as the storm poured down around them. Something about that moment felt different. He didn't know why, but he had a feeling this wasn't the last time their paths would cross.